I have a rule. If I see a model kit that I want, I look at the pictures, appreciate the box art, the way that it looks, and then I try to forget about it for a few weeks. Then, if I see it again, and I want it again, and then again a few weeks later, and then again after that, finally, eventually, I let myself break down and buy it. Such was the way with this, the Ramshackle House by Renedra. It's just a model house, right? Well, no. Because, hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and this is the Rookie Village from the S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl computer game. This has been my favourite game since I got it, probably over a decade ago now. And every new playthrough starts here. It's dank, oppressive, hopeless, perfect. And the Ramshackle House kit looks just like it. So let's put the kit together and see if I can capture the aesthetic of the zone. Now almost immediately I'm going off script. The instructions intend for you to glue all of the 4 wall pieces to the big solid floor piece, and that helps make sure that everything lines up correctly. But I have an idea for later in the build, and so I tried my best to line up the walls without gluing anything to the base. The 3 walls, except for the front wall, actually sit nicely on the table anyway, and it's only the front wall that sits on top of the base floor piece. And they all have pretty nice chunky tabs that act as kind of as keying, but as extra surface area for glue. The chimney needs just a couple of pieces glued together. The second side of the stack fits on first, with the angled little bit ready for the roof in a moment, and then the top of the stack goes on to hold it in place. The roof pieces go on next, and the instructions do say that these have to go on in a particular order as they overlap. And again, just like the walls, these have big tabs to give enough contact surface area for gluing, and a little bit of keying along the way. Although it's not completely perfect, it's more than suitable. And I had no issues lining up any of the main part of the house. That idea I wanted to keep the base floor for did, however, cause me some minor issues with gluing the porch area together. If you build it as intended, those tabs will make lining up everything securely against the house really easily, and against the floor. But not only did I want to reuse the floor for something else later, I also wanted to paint the porch separately. And so I ended up gluing all of these loose pieces with nothing really to guide how they should line up. Because of that, I did have one little problem with the small roof section. It's supposed to be suspended ever so slightly above the front wall, so I had to tear that off and re-glue it because I did it wrong the first time. Once that's on correctly, the smaller wall pieces line up flat, and this assembly can glue to the front of the house. But as I said, I'm not going to glue that yet as I want to paint it separately. But it does need a small section of that floor, well, unless you like having grass on your porch, I guess. I worked out how much of the floor I would need, added a little bit extra just to be sure, and cut away and glued the porch to it. And with that all together in a solid piece, it does tuck up nicely against the front of the house. And so that is the Ramshackle House built nearly as intended, other than kind of not using the floor piece to hold the entire model together. But there is that modification that I keep talking about, something that I wanted to use that nicely textured wooden floor for. The first step of this conversion is taking this little hole in the roof and making it bigger. A lot bigger. I used a fresh, sharp blade and tried to cut carefully along the edges of the shingles of the roof, so that it seems like the tiles have fallen away rather than someone cut into plastic that it's made from. I also tried my best to cut away from myself at all times because these are very unusual cutting angles, and before too long I could pop this section out, and now I have a great big hole in the roof that's just big enough for 2 models to stand up in. I even transferred the roof timber piece from the removed section back over to the model as I thought it looked nice. I glued a couple of bits of sprue on the inside to make a platform sort of thing, and that can suspend another section of that wooden floor. And so instead of being the ground floor, as this piece is supposed to be, it's now the attic floor. But it does leave a visible gap at the back, which I wanted to fill in somehow. Thankfully, the Renedra kit comes with a few accessories. There's a ladder so we can get in and out, and some scatter pieces to fill in our attic, and the chair seemed perfect for that. But I also wanted some larger blocky pieces, like boxes, that would block visibility into the void of the rest of the model. And so I grabbed my last Skytrex boxes from my trip to Warlord Games last year, but I also dug into my bits box and found some old skeleton shields with nice textures, and glued those together to make some boxes. And it all looks pretty good, all told. And the way that I've attached them all together means that I can still remove the floor for painting until that's done. And there's just one last thing that I'd like to add: a little greenery, some creeping vines. These are from Citadel and are made from a super flexible material that doesn't like to be stuck down. It is a good idea, however, and I worked with it until I finally got it into place, creeping up out of a window and the other hole in the roof. Well, now that we've done all of that work, let's get some paint on it. And whilst I really dislike the airbrush, I've been trying to learn how to make it work correctly, and that's a thing that I have still not managed to do. I gave the walls a rough coat of a warm brown, making sure that I didn't give it a good coat. The warm brown would make it look kind of too healthy, too new, and I wanted an older, worn out building. And so the brown went on fairly thinly and patchily. Wonderfully out of focus here is the roof getting a purple and black mix. I didn't really add enough purple, so it sort of just seems black. I'm still aiming for a slightly inconsistent coat, but just not quite as inconsistent as with the walls. Using up the last of the black in the airbrush, I also hit the window frames, although this was just as messy, and you can just about see in the corner here that I spotted some green over the walls to kind of increase that inconsistent look. The insides was pretty simple, they're just the lighter browns and tan. I wasn't totally sure how I wanted to go about it, but I just wanted some distinction between inside and out. The brightest colour is going to be an orange for the brickwork here, filling in the entire chimney with the airbrush just to see how close a line I could manage without masking. It's not perfect, and it sort of does look like the chimney is glowing ever so slightly, but it's not that bad for not using any masking at all. Anyway, moving away from the airbrush to a real brush, because this model has so much sculpted detail, I can use a couple of heavy-duty techniques to bring that out, rather than spending a zillion hours highlighting each line of wood grain. I will dry brush all of the walls with tan. I even went through my brushes to pick out the best brush in my collection for dry brushing this type of model. It's a little larger and softer than what I usually use for dry brushing, and after a little practicing I got into the swing of dry brushing downwards only, which picked out the edge of each plank nicely. I also made sure to do the porch as well, hopefully close enough for it to match, but not so close as for it to appear identical. For the roof, I was happy to keep this fully desaturated. My purple was essentially invisible at this stage, and so I just used a lighter grey to paint over the black. I started with the same downwards dry brush, but I found that an upward stroke actually caught the roof tiles way better, picking them out almost like an edge highlight, and so I went with that. With the highlights dealt with, I certainly wanted to darken the entire model. It's way too bright at the moment, and adding to that, if I use a wash, I can have all of that wood grain detail that's sculpted into the model picked out for me. I pre-make both black and brown washes. I use inks and I mix them in a particular way that acts closer to a glaze or a heavy wash rather than the normal type of wash. I wasn't sure which colour I wanted to use for the wood, and if I wanted to actually custom make one, some added pigment from some other colours. Brown by itself just wasn't strong enough, but the black was solidly way too cold. Instead, I found a mix of about 3-to-1 with just a little black. That picked out the recesses nicely, but the larger proportion of brown darkened the upper surfaces, and so the overall effect was roughly where I wanted it. This kept the warmth on the cooler side without being too harsh, and it gave me all the definition that I wanted. The roof, being mostly black and grey already, suited just a pure black wash, and when I did the inside flooring I took sort of just a brown wash at first, but once that was dry I went back with black as a panel line so that all of those floor planks were nicely picked out and easily visible when you're looking through the hole in the roof. Whilst I had the inside floor in hand, I picked out the bucket and the chair, as they did come with this kit after all. I wasn't worried about spending a lot of time on these, as they are mostly covered, they're not totally visible looking through the roof, but having a little bit of painted in coloured detail would be nice if anyone does kind of peer inside to have a closer look. And the last thing here to paint is the vines. Some fine, careful brushwork. Although these are absolutely huge compared to the details of models that I usually paint, they're certainly the smaller parts of this model. And even here I'm not spending an awful lot of time. I'm just giving it a simple one layer base coat and a little highlight on the wood, and for the leaves just an overbrush of green to let the detail stand out. I resisted the urge to give these a wash, as having the living plant being brighter and healthier than the decrepit, creaky old house, well, that sort of made sense to me. Well, that's a lot of painting done, and so all I need to do now is assemble those pieces. The inner floor stuck to its shelf nicely, the porch needed some scraping so that poly cement had plastic to actually bond with, but that did go on nice and strongly as well, and now the house is done. Naturally, as I've styled this loosely on the S.T.A.L.K.E.R game, it will fit in perfectly for Zona Alpha. But it's actually a fairly generic looking building, so it'll be suitable for bolt action as well, especially the eastern front. There's a geographic connection between those two, so that sort of makes sense. But that's not to say that it can't be used for Warhammer 40k with my Gaunt's Ghost perhaps, or even some high fantasy games, because there's no technology here beyond bricks and wooden planks. I keep picking up this house and looking at it, and I do that occasionally with models that I'm really happy with how I painted, but I think this is the first time I've done that for a terrain piece. I'm certainly happy with this kit. It's sturdy enough for wargaming, easy to build, and has plenty of detail. So maybe I'll buy more from Renedra in the future, but for now, keeping my wallet safe and sound, I can end the video. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.